One is very simple. What is the meaning of the middle nation that you, in the example that you used? And secondly, if the Quran was so convincing for its literary merit, why did not the Arabs of Mecca at that time become convinced?
Awesome. Okay, middle nation. The middle nation is addressed from many a point of view. It is one way it's addressed by scholars is that the nations before us went one of two ways. One became extreme in terms of a spiritual pursuit, and the other became extreme in an intellectual pursuit, and their hearts became hard. And we are a nation that has the balance between the spiritual and the practical, and the intellectual rather. So we combine both, and the Quran, by the way, is an incredibly spiritual document, at the same time an incredibly intellectual document. It fuses those two things together and finds the middle path. The other thing that's mentioned is that there are two extremes, and I'll boil this down like a 30-second answer style thing, okay? There are two problems with people who come into contact with revelation. You have people that know what they're supposed to do and don't do it anyway. You got that kind of people? And you've got the kind of people who think they're doing what they're supposed to, but they have no idea what they're doing. Or they have no idea whether what they're doing is correct or not. In other words, to boil it down even simpler, you have people of knowledge with no action, or you have people of action without knowledge. So you've got these two extremes. And then the middle path is the path that has the people that possess knowledge and then act upon it, not falling into either extreme, thus a middle nation. And there's much more discourse about that as well. Now the second question, if the Quran is so awesome, how come you still have non-believers? And even in the Prophet's time, and he was probably the most, actually not probably, absolutely the most convincing orator as well. So you've got the most convincing document, the most convincing orator, and they're still not convinced. So how do you explain that? Well, the explanation of that is simple. You remember we said we don't want to turn this into a debate before? Only a matter of appreciation. Let me tell you, the Muslim creed is that human beings are not robots. You don't input data and I am ready to accept, and that's not how it works. That's not how human beings work. There is an intellectual component, and what's the other component? A spiritual, a moral component. Now, the Quran, its messages, by the way, if you study early Quran and the themes in the early revelations, they're entirely moral. They're entirely moral. Why are you unjust? Why do you kill the baby girl? Why do you do, and these were filthy practices of the ignorant times before, right? Why do you treat the other in such and such a way? Why do you kill unjustly, etc., etc., etc.? It questioned unjust practices. It questioned greed. It questioned, taking advantage of orphans or poor people, etc., etc. It questioned those things, meaning it brought about moral concerns. The Quran didn't begin by saying, listen, why don't you produce a surah like this? That's not the first revelation, by the way. And a lot of times Muslims don't know that, so you're standing up in an information booth, a da'wah booth, and somebody comes by, that's the Quran? Yeah, you're not Muslim? Hey, produce a surah. He's like, what's a surah? I don't, kafir, produce a surah. Produce 10 surahs, It doesn't, it's an unhealthy approach. The Quran is appealing to the moral, and when the moral is convinced, it solidifies it with the intellectual. Now the people that were not convinced of the message of the Quran were not intellectually bankrupt necessarily, but it became very clear that they were what? Morally bankrupt. These were people that were not willing to give the orphan their due, or give women the share in inheritance, or let go of their power, and because of letting go of their power, they'd have to treat, the other equally, etc. And you read the narrations, the text, the quotes, the famous quotes of those who rejected Islam, the nobility of the Arabs who rejected Islam, and you read their rationale. They were not hiding it. They were saying it outright. Abu Lahab came out and said, so if I accept this religion, what happens? How am I treated? And the Prophet tells him like an equal to everybody else. And he gets up and says, I'm going to be equal to these guys? Forget it. Arrogance. So you cannot take that out of the equation. Just because someone is convinced doesn't mean they will accept, by the way, the final comment on this? Abu Lahab, one of the worst enemies of Islam, by the way. And the uncle of the messenger and his neighbor. It's a nasty guy. Really bad guy. Anyway. You don't know the half of it, really. I'm just a really bad guy. But anyway, so what I want to give you is an example. You and your brother, your actual sibling, or your sister have a fight. And she knows you're right. She knows you're right. Does she accept? Not to your face anyway. I know she's right, but I hate her so much, I can't accept. There's ego, anger, jealousy, pride. Things get in the way of you accepting the truth. And that is no different for the original audience. So we shouldn't oversimplify that into thinking they received the Quran and therefore they became Muslim? I'm going to stop my answer at that, inshallah.